Welcome to Spark Your Joy, Encounters with Spirituality and Creativity, a monthly podcast in which I, Eva Bojashka, will be interviewing international artists, filmmakers, musicians, sound healers, yoga teachers, wisdom teachers, creatives, about their life journeys and exploration of spirituality, creativity, and everything in between. Hello everyone, welcome to Spark Your Joy, Encounters with Spirituality and Creativity. My name is Eva Bujashka, and in this episode I will be talking about very interesting things with my guest today, Tom Rozeman. Welcome.
Hello, nice to be with you, nice to be with the audience.
Thank you for joining me today. Don is a writer. He's a Dutch writer, creative writing coach, essayist, also winner of multiple awards. And I'm very glad that you are here today. And I would like to ask you, as you create and write stories, maybe just tell us a little bit about your story. What is your story?
What is my story?
Yeah.
My life story.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, you already mentioned I'm a writer, I'm an essayist, and my story is that I see that people make up stories constantly about their life. So now, when you ask me for my life story, I know that most of the time what people tell is just a story. It isn't true. So now when you ask me for this, I think, oh wow, I'm gonna say something, but people just make up stories, and that's what I'm discovering, and that's what I am exploring in the stories I write, how people make up stories. So it's really confusing to say, well, this is my life story. I can say something, but I know it won't be really true. Although I think it's true, but it's not really true. Already as a little kid, I was not very much understanding the things that were happening, the things in our family, the things at school. And I started reading. I really was reading a lot to see, hey, how are things working? What are people really doing? And how can I understand? And that has been the story of my life, just to see how are things working. And it started with reading, and also with the big question, what is happening? And later reading became writing, but I think writing is not so much different from reading. You're just exploring. So yeah, the story of my life, I can tell a bit more about it if you like to. So I started reading at a very early age, then there was high school, then later I liked to be a writer, and I studied the Dutch language at the university, and then I followed creative writing for 4 years myself, and then later I became a teacher in creative writing, which I've been now for 20 years or so. Yeah. But I know when you make a story of your life, it's just a story. I could tell something completely different, and it would also be true or not true. But, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's this actually what you're saying kind of aligns with what I am busy with at the moment. Here in the Netherlands, teaching about the medicine wheel of the Andes, and the way this ancient wisdom teaches us how can we rewrite our stories and create our true story, true life story that is not conditioned by ancestors, but by our ancestors, by our genes, by our culture. I was asking you how creating stories is helping us also maybe to create our our own story, you know?
Yeah.
How is it relevant? I mean,
Yeah.
it can be also that it's not. And if it is relevant, how does it help us? I do think that it is, and I do think that
it's so important to read and to write. It's really important to write and to read, because then you can see how people make up stories, and not how the writer is making a story, but how the characters are making a story, how people make a story, and that's so important. Yeah, it makes us really understand life and the mechanism in lives, and that's why I really do hope that people always will be writing and reading, even though there now is so much new media in the world. Maybe we forget about writing and reading, and everything become visual. But there are some truths you really only can experience through writing and reading. Yeah, that's what I guess.
And how is that, like, maybe if you want to elaborate on that, how does that help us understand life, creating for instance, a story?
As a writer, you look at all those stories of your characters, and you see, hey, they think in a certain way because they have this story. An example I use a lot of the time is with my daughter. I really like to be a good parent for her, and then I'm thinking, oh, I think I'm a good parent for her, but that's just a story. That's just a story, and then it also makes me vulnerable, and then sometimes it's really hard to see the truth. But maybe sometimes I'm not a good parent, but I can't see it because I'm so preoccupied with my story to be a good parent. So, and this mechanism I can give to my characters, and then I can explore what happens. And you always see that how characters and people, how they make their stories, that's also where they are vulnerable. I think we're really vulnerable with the stories we have. And there's also a conflict in it, because you have the story with words and there's a truth without words, and those are kind of separate worlds. That's what I find beautiful in the Tao Te Ching. The first sentence, there are really a lot of different translations, but you could translate it in this way, as far as I understand. The way that can be talked about is not the true way. So, yeah, you have the story, that's words. And there is something without words, but those are different things. And it's so beautiful to explore that in stories, and also to explore that with students. And they can explore their writing, but also their lives. Hey, for a student, how do I make up stories in my own life? What is my story? And how do I is there conflict because I have this story? Maybe they like to be a good student, or they like to pass their exams, or they like to become a writer. And if you say, well, this is my story, for me it's important to be a writer, then all the conflicts you will have will be about being a writer, because then it's, oh, I'm a writer, I'm not a writer, things are going well with writing, things are going not so well with writing. But if you forget about it, about being a writer, then there won't be a conflict, and then you just can write. Yeah. I'm talking and talking.
Yeah, no. It's. I mean, from that I have two more questions.
Yeah. Okay.
One is, maybe let's go to that first. You say stories are about stories.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Everything is always about itself. when I'm in a relationship with someone, of course it's about the other person and about me, but it's also about the relationship. And the students who come to this academy, they come there to become a writer. But when they are in the system of the academy, it's also about the academy. It's also about being a student. So they come to the academy to be a writer, but what they really become, is a student. So it's also with this podcast, we're trying to communicate about this time short story writing, but it's also about podcasting. Before we started, we did everything with the equipment, and it was taking very long to prepare everything. So yes, it is about short story writing, but it's also about podcasting, and it's the same with literature and with writing. Yeah, it can be about everything, what's important to people, but at the same time it's also about writing, reading, literature. So yeah.
And then you said also something about did you say something about it, or I just credited my mind about Taoism? You mentioned,
I did mention it.
So maybe you could say a little bit more about it. This is something that you work with, is present in your work, or your perception of the world, or
the problem is with Taoism, I'm really into it, I'm reading it, I'm writing about it, but when I just try to say something about it, it's evaporated, it's all gone. It's really hard to grasp. Yeah. So
it's complex also.
Yeah, but what I like to do with my students is that sentence I already mentioned, that the way that you can talk about is not the true way. When they first come to the academy, I say this to them, and it's also about that. It looks like we can talk about writing and we can understand each other, but what's real and what's important, that's something you can't communicate about. So, and it's really important that they know that all this talking we do, in one way it's really important, but in one way it can never be about the essence of it. Yeah. Are you looking at me?
Why cannot be about the essence?
Oh, because you have the words, and you have the reality outside of the words, and those are two different things. And as long as you're talking, but it's
But then I also saw that you say that in this reality there is this story, and if the story is not there, the reality is different.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I'll try to understand what I am saying with it. We make stories, and although you have language and you have the world outside the language, but when you make a story as a writer or just as a human being, we always have stories in our head about our identity, etc. But to me, when someone makes a story or tells a story or writes a story, then the reality is changing, because I have this watch, and if this we can agree upon, if this watch isn't existing, then it's not a reality than with this watch that is existing. And those are two different realities, and it's the same with the story. Stories are part of the reality, and if there is a story, then it's part of reality. And if that story isn't there, then the reality is different, because that story is not there. And when there is a story, and the story starts to change, then the reality starts to change, because the story is a part of the reality. Yeah. And that's what writers can use for their writing. When the story of the character is changing, then their reality is changing. That's really an important lesson for writers. Because we think that we as a writer, we have to make a story, and then the story is changing, and then it's coming to an end, which is true. But for the character itself also has a story. And the story of the character is changing. So it's not so much about what we are writing, but it's more about the reality and the story of the character. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. No, that is very interesting.
I'm a teacher, and I immediately start to teach when you ask me questions. So, yeah.
No, it is very interesting. I really find it interesting because, again, I mean, I relate it to to what I do, and now with this program and this ancient wisdom, because it is I kind of feel it is as if the character are the human beings creating their own stories, right? Yeah. And the writer is the or their higher self, or the highest instance that could see from a distance how is that all
maybe a facilitator or
how is that all unfolding. So it's very interesting, and that actually brings me to another question, which is more about the process of creation rather than the story, more about creating and creativity. Creativity. Mm-hmm. How do you see that? What is it for you? Creativity. Because this podcast is also about...
I've always been struggling with that word from the time I was a little kid. Creativity for me was people doing something I didn't understand, and but now I think everything is creating itself, and you don't have to do so much. I think the most important thing with creativity is to see how I am limiting myself, how I am limiting the story, my perception, how I am limiting my students, and to see if I can get rid of those limitations, because creativity is everywhere. And I don't believe there is someone that's creating us, and I don't believe that I am creating what's happening there or there or there. But I do have thoughts about creation, or I have limiting stories, and to get rid of all those limiting stories, like I have to be creative, that's a story. So I think we don't have to do a lot for being creative, because it's the same with breathing. Sometimes we are limiting our breath, and then we have to look at it, and we go to a coach for breathing, or we go to someone else. And I guess, well, I'm not a breathing coach at all, I don't know what they're doing, but I guess they try to get rid of they help us to get rid of our limitations. Mm-hmm. So being creative is getting rid of the limitations. Though sometimes it's really hard to see what is true identity and what is a limitation. With my students, sometimes I think, well, it looks like they are limiting themselves. Mm-hmm. But it could also be it's just them, and it's how they're supposed to be. And then I'm thinking, how can I help them? Do I have to say something that they are limiting themselves? Or is this their true nature and they're not limiting themselves at all? And that's hard sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I I think that also that creativity is our nature.
Yeah.
So if someone is blocking their creativity, maybe it is blocking it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's okay. And then as it is a podcast about creativity and spirituality, and I do recognize a lot of things that I kind of feel they are spiritual to a certain extent, in a way of the way of perceiving the world in this way. It's a bit different than someone who is not spiritual. They're not aware that so I just wanted to ask you, what is it to be spiritual for you, and what is spirituality for you, and how does that comes into your work and into your life?
Yeah. I think for me, spirituality is really related to creativity, and yeah, for this podcast I was thinking for creativity and spirituality, how do we relate, but you really can't do without spirituality. You can't say, hey, you're an artist and are you spiritual? For me, it's like, hey, you are a human being, are you into breathing? Yeah, it's really impossible. I don't know how you can
separate them.
Separate it. I guess spirituality, the core of it is, I guess it's the Latin word spiritus, which is the soul. And of course, you need a soul to create. For me, it's the same. Yeah, being spiritual is being creative, and being creative is being spiritual. Yeah. I can't see how the two of them don't work together. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That were my questions. I don't know if you wanted to share some last words with the audience of Spark Your Joy. What's coming up for you? Something.
Yeah. What's coming up for me? I'm writing a lot of little essays, small essays about writing, about Taoism and writing. I guess I will finish it in 2 years. And I just started a new website with my own name, Rozeman.com, but it will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
At this moment, in the summer of 2023, I'm just starting this website, so there won't be so much, but maybe the listeners will be listening to this later, and then there will be a lot of information about writing and spirituality and creativity on tomrozeman.com.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so for everyone who wants also to connect, maybe they can also already go there.
Yeah, there's my YouTube. When you go to the website, you can see my YouTube channel, Facebook, etc. So it's really a good way to connect. Yeah.
Okay, well then, thank you for being here, for being my guest today on Spark Your Joy, Encounters with Spirituality and Creativity. If you are curious to know how creative you are, you're welcome to head over my website, evabuflies.com, where you can take the quiz, how creative you are. And then thank you again, and see you everyone in next episode.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me in your wonderful show, and thank all the listeners for listening. So, yeah,
Thank
it really
you.
was a pleasure. Thank you.